Hey everybody, Jake here with Fireside Tattoo Network. I'm a little bit bundled up because it is freezing in my studio today. Welcome to another episode of Fireside Technique. This episode is one that we've been asked for a lot. We get a lot of questions about watercolor effects and tattoos, how to pull off successful watercolor tattoos. I am not a watercolor artist and I don't do a lot of watercolor effects in tattoos, but I do a lot of painterly tattoos and I do paint a lot in oil. So I have some ideas on the subject and I think they translate well to any type of painterly effect, whether it's watercolor or oil. So watercolor tattoos, a lot of what passes today as watercolor tattoos is some like splatter of color on someone's back that maybe transitions from green to purple and it has soft edges and sometimes there's like some line work thrown in front of it that's kind of scratchy and we're calling that watercolor a lot. And it's fine. I think it's a little bit of a slap in the face to actual watercolor artists who really put out beautiful work, but it is kind of what is considered watercolor tattooing today. I have my ideas on how that's going to age, how those types of tattoos are going to age, and I'll get into that during the episode. But for watercolor tattoos, I think the first thing we should do is look at a successful watercolor painting and see what they did right. Try to identify some of the things that they did well, and then see how we can implement those ideas into our tattoos. So let's do that now. All right, so let's start. Here is a watercolor painting by Dan Marshall. I chose Dan for a couple of reasons, really three reasons. One, he is an awesome plein air watercolor painter. Two, he is just as good of a tattooer. And three, he was on the Fireside podcast earlier this year and did a great interview, so I wanted to plug his work a little bit. You can go to danmarshallart.com and check his work out. He is, if you're not familiar with his watercolor work, you may know him as a tattooer. If you're not familiar with his watercolor work, you should really be following it. He is awesome. Okay, so this watercolor painting is typical. It's what you would think. It's very good, but it's typical in what you would think for watercolor effects. We have a lot of translucency, transparency, a lot of kind of sketchiness. It's very atmospheric, but let's dissect it a little bit. All right, we have, in Dan's painting here, we have a full value range, right? We have some very dark darks and some very light lights. We also have a nice variation of edges. We have some very soft edges that almost disappear in the far background. We have some medium kind of soft edges in the midground with the trees and stuff, and then we have some very crisp edges in the little house in the foreground, in the windows and along the roof line. Now, in addition to that, our strongest points of contrast are right there in that same area. We have the darkest darks in those windows, and then we have the lightest lights right against them in the side of the building. So it pulls your eye straight into that because we have our strongest points of contrast and our sharpest edges right there in that area. Once your eye moves into that, he kind of leads you back and down the creek bed or down the river and back through the rest of the composition. So Dan has made a decision on how he wants your eye to move through, and he's executed it just flawlessly. It's really, really well done. So how can we pull these same kinds of effects off in tattoos and give this kind of watercolor or atmospheric look? Well, let's see. I intentionally did this tattoo in 2 sittings, and here is a fresh photo at the end of the first sitting. Okay, so this is, in my mind, where I think a lot of people leave their watercolory or painterly tattoos. The fills aren't really solid, the edges are a little soft, and they're like, oh, it looks like a painting, right? And in this photo, it doesn't really look bad. It is fresh. We've talked a lot about, over the years of doing this show, about how fresh tattoos hide a lot of flaws. Now, I will say there are a couple of things that I've already established in this tattoo that I think are important. I feel like I've started to establish a hierarchy, meaning that the foreground wing and the head and body are more in focus, and then the tail and the background wing are starting to look out of focus. Of course, it's all just kind of roughly scrubbed in there, but I've started to establish that hierarchy, that same hierarchy that Dan had established with his building in the foreground, or the building that had the strong contrast that pushed you back through the rest of the composition. All right, let's take this same tattoo and look at it healed. Let's look at it, and this is probably a month or so later. And you can see that it looks terrible, right? And this is, like I said, this is where I feel like a lot of people leave
their tattoos. It's really washy. There's no real contrast once it's healed down. The edges from color to color just kind of fall out from one into the next. And it really just looks like an unfinished tattoo. It looks like a tattoo that someone should have spent a lot more time on. Now, I've got some decent effects down here in the tail area that look watercolory, but as you move back into that foreground, what I'm considering the foreground area of the wing and the head and the body, it looks really unfinished. So let's fix that. Here I am starting the second sitting, and very first thing I'm doing is I'm picking my hierarchy. I am choosing my star, which in my case is going to be in the head right here, and I'm pushing my darks. I'm going in with my darkest darks, just off of a black, really kind of a greenish, bluish black, and I'm starting to establish a light source. The light's going to be coming from directly above, nice and simple. And I'm using probably, I think, a 9-round liner here. No, I'm sorry, a 9-round shader here. And I'm just kind of scumbling in and identifying some shapes. I am pushing my darkest darks, and then you'll see that I start to introduce some lighter lights. Now, what I am not doing is covering the entire underpainting. Let's call that first pass an underpainting. What I'm not doing is covering that entire underpainting. I want some of that kind of washiness of the first pass to show through. What I want to do is layer directly on top of it so that I get a little more contrast and a little more pop, and I get a tattoo that lives for a long time in the skin. The concern with some of these really washy colors that just kind of that look good in photographs whenever they're fresh is that give them a couple of nice Florida sunburns and they're going to look terrible. You'll have no idea what they were supposed to even be. So you really want to make sure that you're pushing your contrast and you're varying your textures, and you're using all of the tools at your disposal to make sure that the tattoo can live for a long time in the skin. All right. Same thing, as I move back, obviously I'm not going quite as dark here. I'm going with more midtones, but I'm starting to work to separate the back of the bird from the rear wing. Those two were a little bit too close together from a value standpoint, and they weren't. They were reading kind of on the same plane. Now, I don't want to go quite as dark in this area as I did in the head, because then it's going to jump too far forward and start to compete with the head. All I want to do is push it just enough to separate it from the back of the bird. Now here you can see, and I'm sorry it got out of focus a little bit. My camera must have been focusing on something else, but you can still tell that I'm starting to make some transitions from the edges. From the edge of that red into the yellow, I'm kind of mixing a little bit of an orange that I mixed from red and yellow, and I'm softening that edge almost to give the effect that those colors have bled together a little bit. What you don't want, or what I feel like makes kind of a poor tattoo, is these transitions that are kind of halfway thought out. If paint sits on canvas or sits on paper, whether it's oil paint, acrylic paint, or watercolor, they kind of want to intermingle. Whenever you run a brush stroke up against another brush stroke, you kind of pick both colors up a little bit, and that's the effect that I'm trying to give there in these edges. As I move down, I'm trying to push my contrast even further here in the belly of the bird and really create some textural effects. I'm trying to still work from my light source, which is coming from above, pushing my darks, and then pushing my lights, but not covering the entire underpainting. In order to give that painterly effect, I really want some of those washy tones to kind of push through, but not too many. We don't want it to look like it was kind of scratched in. Another thing you might have noticed up to now is that I am using multiple needle configurations. I've gone from round liners to 9 mags, and I think I used a 23 mag, and back and forth, so that I'm getting different types of marks. And you'll see also sometimes I'm scumbling back little circles, other times I'm making scrapes back and forth. I'm changing and varying my mark making. That's really important in any type of painting, is that you're not using the same brush all the time, and you're not making the exact same little marks all the time. You want to vary those marks and vary the tools that you're using, so that you can get as much variation and as much interest in the pieces as you can. Now here I'm going through and starting to define a few of the edges on those yellows that were kind of healed, and it looks like I'm going pretty dark. I'm using kind of a mustardy brownish color right there, but it's really when it heals, it won't be that much darker. It'll be enough to provide a little contrast, but not so much that it looks like a stripe across the feather there. Here I am once again trying to transition those edges nice and smoothly. I had that kind of dark edge to the foreground wing, and it looked a little bit separated from the wing underneath, so I'm just trying to introduce some of those same darks just a little bit below it, and trying to take that edge and just soften it enough where it still reads as an edge, but where it looks like it connects to the rest of the wing. I just think it's important to go through and really, you want to give the effect that something was done with immediacy when you're working with watercolor or painterly effects. You want to give the effect, the idea that you did it with some quick marks, but you can't actually do it with quick marks. You really need to be methodical. A lot of times the best painters that have the most kind of painterly effects, they go through and they really render everything, and then they come back with a large brush at the end, and they kind of simplify, and they turn 5 marks into 1 or 2 marks, and it gives the illusion that they kind of effortlessly turned a cheekbone or caught the lid of an eye or something like that. But really, that was pretty methodical. It wasn't something that was done in a single pass. And that's something we have to keep in mind with tattoos as well. And in my mind, it's even more important in tattooing than it is in painting, just because of the limitations of the skin and because our canvases are out in the sunshine all the time, and we need those tattoos to hold up well for long periods of time. Here I am kind of coming through and sharpening those edges of the wing. I'm trying to get a nice or a good bit of contrast in edges. I've got some edges that are very soft and some edges that are very crisp. We've got some very textural areas that are pushed against some very smooth areas. So the goal is contrast in every way possible. If any of this stuff sounds foreign to you, with us talking about things like edges and values and contrast and shape and all that kind of stuff, I would encourage you to check out our Fireside Foundations course, which dives into all these basic drawing fundamentals that I think makes a solid draftsman, and then talks or helps you to directly figure out how to apply those to tattooing, which ones are the most important to tattooing. I think it's a great course, especially for someone that maybe hasn't gone through a traditional art program and is trying to learn to tattoo, a self-taught artist, things like that. No matter what stage of your career, I think it's helpful. But I'll tell you what I'll do. We're still building that course out. It will be out probably maybe by the time that this video is out, but if not, I'll put a link in the show notes to put you on a mailing list. We're going to sell the course on the front end for $99. Then it's going to go to $129. It is looks like it's going to be 6 assignments, 6 videos with 6 assignments attached to them that will walk you through these foundation ideas, these principles, and then directly apply them to tattooing, one assignment after another. So if you're interested in that, go on and sign up, and we'll make sure that you know whenever it's available. Okay. You'll see here I've moved to yet another needle configuration, and this is actually a 3-liner, a really tight little 3-liner. And what I'm doing is I'm not making really solid lines. I'm simply introducing a new edge, a new texture, and those textures or those edges are following shapes that I've already established with my shader. So, and I'm not lining an entire shape. I'm kind of meandering in and out just to add a little bit more interest. These won't be lines that read as really solid lines because it is a really thin liner, and I'm just barely kind of laying it in there. It's just meant to add a little extra pop. And you can see as I sit the guy up here and I'm getting ready to move to that background wing that you can already tell that we've got a lot more going on, and this tattoo is going to hold up a lot better over time. We can see where our light's coming from. We've established our hierarchy. We're looking at, you go straight to the head, body, and foreground wing, and then move to those atmospheric kind of areas in the back wing and in the tail. And so it still gives that painterly effect, but rendering those certain areas more fully helps give the tattoo some longevity. It helps it to read better over a longer period of time. One more thing that you might notice is that I am working back and forth between light and dark. The idea that you have to do all your darks first and then all your lights after that makes it very tough to pull these effects off. So I wouldn't get too worried about working darks up against fresh lights and things like that. A lot of people are pretty concerned with smudging and smearing and the light colors kind of picking up the dark colors. And as long as you're using ointment and kind of wiping away from the light areas, I would encourage you to go ahead and experiment and move back and forth between your lights and darks. So cleaning the tattoo up here, shoulders in the way, there we go. And here it is, here's the finished tattoo. A lot more textural stuff going on. You can see those little lines and things like that I kind of laid in, and they'll soften up. I left a lot of that stuff in the tail alone. I was kind of happy with how that stuff sat after the first sitting. I really just wanted to push those foreground areas. You can see a lot of the old tattoo, or the first pass of the tattoo, is still standing through there. I'm going to leave a good bit of it. And I think that this will provide for a much better tattoo over the long haul. And I hope this helped you guys. Here is the still shot of the finished tattoo. Looks a little bit saturated in this photo, but I think it still gives you a good idea of what the finished piece looks like. And I wish I had a healed photo, but as of when I did this video, that tattoo was not quite healed yet. It's only about a week or so old, so I'll try to get one and post it. If you follow us on any of the social media, if you follow me on Instagram @PlugUglyArt, you'll probably see a healed photo of it sometime soon. Hey, we would love your support on Patreon. We do not monetize our YouTube channel, and we don't seek out any sponsors. We do all this stuff for free, and it costs a little money to put it on every week. So if you want to click the link in our bio down here, you could go to Patreon, and there's all kinds of good gifts for you in it, like t-shirts and back rubs and webinars and mentions on the podcast and stuff like that. Thank you guys. We really appreciate your support.